And we have what promises to be a very moving and an instructive program for you this evening, featuring Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, who represents Pennsylvania's 4th District in suburban Philadelphia, and her son, Harry Cunnane, who works as a resource director for a Philadelphia treatment center where he once sought help for his own addiction. Together, Madeleine and Harry have written Under One Roof about how they coped with Harry's 10-year battle with opioid abuse. It's an intimate and heart-wrenching story told with remarkable candor through the dual perspectives of a mother who is rising in politics and a son who is living a double life. It's also a story rooted in a national drug crisis that has affected all too many families. I also should add that this is the first time in the history of PNP that we get to host an author for a new book just days after she served as a House manager for a Senate trial of an impeached president. So it's certainly been quite a month for Madeleine. In conversation with Madeleine and Harry will be Jake Tapper, who is not only an outstanding CNN anchor and Washington-based correspondent, known for his savvy and incisive commentary, but a very supportive PNP neighbor and customer, and a native of Philadelphia. For those of you not familiar with how this virtual format works, although you're not visible to us, you'll still be able to ask questions if you'd like. To do so, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. The chat function also will be active, and in that column, you'll find a link for purchasing copies of Under Our Roof, and also copies of a children's companion version, You Are Always Loved. So Madeleine, Harry, and Jake, the screen is yours.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. First of all, let me just start by saying that Congresswoman Dean has instructed me to call her Mad or Madeleine, but I am just not wired to call a Congresswoman Mad or Madeleine. But just so you know, when I call her that throughout, when I call her Congresswoman, she has told me not to. It's an honor to be here. I read the book. Here's the uncorrected author's proof. I read the book earlier because I had them on the show. I think it was Tuesday on my show on CNN, The Lead. It was, you know, as these things go, relatively short. But it was good to know that I had a much longer opportunity to talk to them because it's such a powerful book. And I do recommend that anybody watching, you go to the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and click, and there's a place where you can go and buy the book. You won't regret it. It's very moving. I've never read anything like it. I'm going to ask them questions about the book for about until about 8:35, 8:40, and then I'll open it up to questions. Before I start with the emotion of what they went through that they wrote about here, I do want to ask just one question about the Senate impeachment trial, Congresswoman, because you were one of the House impeachment managers, and you're in your closing remarks, recalling the day of January 6th, you got emotional. Understandably, it was a very emotional experience for thousands, if not millions of people, but especially the people in that building. And just because I that's probably the last time a lot of people watching right now saw you was on the screen that day, I'm wondering if you could just tell us what was going through your mind beyond obviously the importance of the impeachment proceedings and your desire that the Senate vote to convict. What was going through your mind that caused you to have such a viscerally emotional response? Were you thinking about that day? Were you thinking about your fears of that day? What were you thinking?
Thanks for having us, number one, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to Politics and Prose, to Brad and his wife, and thanks for asking that. I was there on January 6th, along with hundreds and hundreds of others in the Capitol. I was up in the gallery at the time of the insurrection. And so there were certain things that took place. And one thing that took place that was so visceral to me was after a series of warnings and being told to take out your gas mask, and then being told to duck, being told to prepare to put your gas mask on, was the banging, the sound of the banging on the doors of those beautiful ceremonial doors down to the House chamber, where you would normally see a president announced as he or she would give a State of the Union address. That's what made it so terrifying. the absolute pounding on the doors. I knew we were in grave, grave danger at that moment. And I had heard others, including Jamie Raskin, say that. The other thing was that I think this is such an important time for our country. So it was very personal, but in the professional, in the constitutional sense, what I kept thinking all as I prepared and as I presented was, we are in a conversation with history. We are talking to our past, to the framers who sought to offer these protections in a constitution so wisely, but we're also talking about our children, his children, my grandchildren, and our future. And what we do matters. It will matter to the future. And so that's what I thought. We're in a continuum with history. We suffered the gravest attack upon our Congress, our Constitution, an attack spirited by a president, Americans attacking Americans, using the American flag to batter people. It makes me very emotional.
Yeah, understandably so. Understandably so. But that banging, that visceral memory of the banging,
That sound, I'll never forget.
Yeah, that's certainly very revealing. Harry, the book is a very open and messy tour through what it was like to start with quote unquote harmless high school drinking and end up an opioid addict. And I'm wondering if you can, what's interesting about it is because the first experiences that you talk about are ones that probably a lot of people can relate to. Getting drunk in high school. I'm not advocating for that, to be clear, but you know, getting drunk in high school, that leads to marijuana, that leads to other things. And there are different friends that you leave along the way, or some leave you. One friend like draws the line at drinking, won't smoke pot, etc. I'm wondering if you can explain to us why it is you think that you ended up, you kept going. Is it because addiction is a disease and it's a disease that you didn't know you suffered from and that was the natural course? Or is it at one point you discuss an unhappiness that you had? Is that, tell us, I guess, I mean, it's kind of a simple, but also maybe a naively complicated question, but why?
It's a great question, and it's definitely not as simple as I'd like it to be. I think there's a lot of factors. I think in terms of potentially the way my brain was wired, it sort of made it easier to continue on down that path. That being said, I wanted to highlight in the book really the progression, because you know, a lot of times when we look at someone who's suffering with a substance use disorder, you see what's almost the end result. You know, you see the opioids or heroin or whatever that may be. But you don't get there overnight. And I never thought that I would get there. I talked about in the book, as I was progressing, I always had a line of my never, you know, where I would never go. And originally it was alcohol. I wasn't going to do it. Then pot, then pills, then Coke, but as you keep going a little bit, it's just you chip away at it and you're able to go deeper and deeper down. You know, but I think the scary part is, and you mentioned, I'm not, you know, kids in high school shouldn't be drinking. We're not condoning that, but that seems in our culture relatively normal. It's not crazy for somebody in high school to be drinking. It's, you know, now it's even less crazy for somebody to smoke pot. But it just shows how close and sort of slippery that slope is for anyone who starts on that process.
And Congresswoman, you start off, I mean, it's so for people who haven't read it yet, and again, go to the chat and you can buy it, and I do recommend it. For people who don't know, like, you are a professor when this book begins. Well, I mean, I guess before it's when you meet PJ, your husband, but when Harry's there, you're a professor, and your political course is diaried in this as well. The book is I don't know how many people out there read Anderson Cooper's book with his mom, Gloria Vanderbilt, but it's two authors, and here's Madeleine here's Harry, here's Madeleine, here's Harry, back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes writing about the same thing, sometimes writing about different things. But this is all going on, and you're suspicious of his behavior, and he won't confide in you, and he shuts you off. And that goes on for years and years. And you try, and he shuts you off. What goes through your mind when you went and sat down and tried to recreate all of this, knowing in retrospect where it was going to end? What goes through your mind?
Well, just in terms of the process, when somebody suggested we write a book, we both immediately thought, well, we should write it separately. And so you see that literally I have a different font from Harry to show different voice. We purposefully did not compare notes. We set out an outline together and we wrote separately. We got about halfway through the manuscript when we started to see if we could put these events together. And then the editor, I thought, dovetailed them very, very nicely. What was going through my mind was initially the reaction of a mother that thinks, okay, he's going to go through adolescent experimentation, and I guess I got to put up with it. I came from a big family. I know what this is all about. But then we got into more serious battling, me knowing he was slipping away, that his gifts, his beautiful personality, his warmth, his surroundedness by friends, the biggest heart of anybody you ever met, was just draining away from him day by day. And we battled nonstop. I used to say, there's a fire in our house, but nobody seems to know it but me. But he was masterful at manipulating, telling a great story. And I guess there's a part of me that is revealed in this book that as much as I thought I knew what was going on, I didn't have a clue. I was really in denial.
The very, not to spoil it, but I mean, Harry is going through situations. The book starts with a very violent situation in, what is it, West Philadelphia? North Philadelphia. And at one point, one of the guys he gets high with goes to jail for manslaughter because he was the same drugs he was doing with Harry, he did with somebody else, and that person OD'd. And just the difference between your mom's fears about what might be happening, but she doesn't know, and what you're actually living through, Harry, it's so powerful in its, diaries from people on two different planets.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the way that it felt. And, at the time, that's how I wanted it, because I was terrified that if anybody saw what was truly going on, regardless of how strong a mother's love, she was going to want no parts of that. Nobody wanted any parts of what I was doing. I mean, the violence, the drugs, the stealing, the lying, everything that went along with my substance use disorder and the way that I fell into it. And watching my mom, my dad, my family, these productive members of society thriving as I'm just plummeting, was something that I tried so desperately hard to hold on to cover up, to hide, and was something that kept me for a long time from asking for help, for reaching out, because of that shame, that stigma of, no matter how much somebody cares for me, this is too much. This is too much to take.
Yeah, there's a passage when I think your mom is driving you to a rehab facility where she says something along, I have this here. She says something along the lines of, why didn't you ask for help? And you say something along the line, oh, here it is. Harry, did you ever think of asking us for help? This is your mom's recollection. Harry, did you ever think of asking us for help? I did, he quietly explained, but it just never seemed like a good time. With Larry sick, that's a friend of the family that's with him. But then there was Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, birthdays, the elections, Thanksgiving. After a long pause, he added, maybe there's no such thing as a good time. Is that your recollection as well, that conversation?
For sure.
Harry, yeah.
It was a long, quiet car ride from Pennsylvania out to Wernersville, PA, to Caron Treatment Centers. And it was just, at that moment, I had sort of seen, because I said yes to going to treatment, that maybe it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be to accept the help. When I said yes, I wasn't disowned. I wasn't abandoned. My parents, my family stood by me before I was ready to, do anything for myself. But I think it's important for anybody who's struggling with a substance use disorder to realize that there's no perfect time. There's always a circumstance, something to use as a justification. And I think, at the end of the day, that's really what it was grasping at anything I could to justify why I shouldn't go. And avoiding the key reason of killing myself as the reason that I should, and I should now.
There's so many moments in the book, Congresswoman, where as a reader, I'm just there and I'm thinking like, oh, this is going to be, this will be the moment where, there's the reality is, everybody's confronted with the reality. And there are so many times when that doesn't happen, when he's having a negative reaction to the pills that he's popping, and the hospital has no idea what's going on, why he's having this reaction. And you're kind of like, anything you want to tell me? And he's like, no, and just walk out. Ultimately, though, and I want people to understand this because it's an important part of the book, it is ultimately a book about hope. It is ultimately a book about, you can get through this. So often these stories are, they don't end well. It's a mother who has lost her son writing about that. But this is a completely different message. This is, we were screwed up for a while and we didn't know how to deal with it, but then ultimately we got on the right path and got out of it. Were you at all, Congresswoman, worried about airing your dirty laundry? You're in public life. Somebody might use this against you.
I think I thought of that early on in Harry's recovery, as much for me to come to terms with what we were dealing with and what we had discovered and what he was trying now to accomplish. And also I was worried for him and his precarious recovery. But I have to say, I remember asking you a couple of years back, would it be all right if in my work in the Pennsylvania House then, that I told our story and you gave me permission and that was all right. But I had to grow to that, and I wanted to be sure he was solid in his recovery. But I have to say, people have said to me, oh, it takes courage for you to have written this so honestly and to reveal, what mistakes you made along the way. I think it's empowering to just be honest about myself, warts and all. If I can't own this at this age in my life, at this stage of my life, what's the point? Why are we on this path? Why are we on this journey if we can't say, here's what I did, here's what I learned, here's how I hope things can be better in the future? And you're right, this is a book about hope. We have a lot of friends who have lost. We have a lot of friends who have family members in recovery. So it's a love story. I hope you'll see that. But it's a book about hope.
And I just want to add quickly there, and you mentioned it, so much of what gets talked about are the horror stories. On your show on Tuesday, you look at the numbers from May to May of this year, and it's 81,000 people have died. That's significantly up, and that's only touching the beginning parts of COVID. And it, everything sort of points that it through the entirety of
died of opioid overdoses. I just want to for people watching. Yeah.
Yep. But it looks like it's continuing to rise. And when we were approached with the idea to write this book, I had knowing a little bit about what was out there. So much of it, like you said, is the horror story. But even the stories that are told where there's a positive outcome, so often the book or the movie ends at recovery. And that's something we didn't want to do. So our book the first half is active addiction and the second half is the recovery process. So I wanted to highlight, again, this is a disease, but it's a treatable disease. And what is possible through recovery is so much more than what you get and what you see normally on media of, oh, they stopped using drugs. That's great. Look at the blessings and the joys that come and the opportunities that arise through recovery. So that's something I really wanted to focus on in the writing and in telling our story of both sides.
And you're great writers. Congresswoman, you're a writing professor, so that's not a surprise, but Harry, obviously a very talented writer. I mean, the way that you wrote about the sensation of cocaine was a very, I thought, just very resonant description. Just it's not, I mean, you're both very, very talented at conjuring forth experiences. Congresswoman, I mean, this really is, you talk about, warts and all, you're very honest about, you didn't know what was going on. Your husband thought that maybe you were pushing too much. I mean, it's there are probably a lot of people watching right now, or people who will read this book, who will identify with being the parent that is pushing but can't get through, and yet also as a reader, you want to be like, go in there, haul them off to rehab, you know what I mean, because you know where it's going to go. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that, because I wonder when you sat down and wrote about it, if you what you felt, because it's so honest and so open, but at the same time, like, we know what he's doing, you don't, you know what I mean?
Well, we did tell the story correctly.
Yeah.
And Jake, I want to give a shout out to my husband. Through this process of writing, I learned a lot. I learned a tremendous amount in reading his chapters, things I didn't know, the very dangerous stuff you're talking about. But we didn't do this alone. As we finished the book, I want to just tell a funny story. My husband, PJ, who was the glue of this whole thing, offered to write his own chapter. And his chapter, he literally wrote it and offered it to the editors, who summarily rejected it. And his chapter was entitled, "I Was There Too." So he wanted to tell his perspective, because it really is a family affair. But you know what I really value, I always used to tell my students of writing that it is in writing that you learn. So the challenge of writing this book, I knew I would learn about myself. I knew I would learn about my failures and my weaknesses, and some of my mean-spiritedness and the fighting that we had. But also, I learned so much more from Harry. And I learned that what our family went through, and I would have wished it away if I possibly could have, made us stronger. Take it from here.
Yeah.
No, I would echo that. I mean, being in recovery, when we started this, I had about 6 years in recovery, and we had grown a lot. We had rebuilt trust. Our family had mended and healed a lot of the wounds that went along with my addiction and through recovery. But there's stuff in the book, as I'm sure you can assume, that are things that would not have ever been spoken about. There were a lot of those situations where when we started writing, she still believed it to be what she was writing, or maybe with a little bit skeptical, but not at all in the detail as to what actually happened. And same goes for me. Originally, I kind of thought I had everyone fooled until a later point in time. But the one part when I read about, she had thought about hiring a private investigator to follow me. I mean, that terrified me 8 years later. So it was an experience to read both sides.
My my first full-time editor, my first job in journalism, is a guy named David Carr. He's no longer with us. And David Carr he was my editor at Washington City paper. He wrote a great book, and a lot of it is about addiction as well, called The Night of the Gun. And he was addicted to crack. He later went on to become a huge star in media, and he was a New York Times media writer for years. He died unrelated to drugs. But there's a scene in his book where he has twin daughters. He and his wife are both addicts, and he leaves the daughters in the car in winter in Minnesota to go into a crack house. And so I don't want to spoil anything, but there is a scene where you're getting high right after your daughter is born, Harry, that reminded me very much of it, which is just like, it's a disease.
That's the power.
There's nothing intellectually in your life that makes you want to be anywhere other than in the hospital with your girlfriend and your baby. But it's a disease. It's like running out to, I can't think of an analogy, but I mean, it's just I think that was the moment when I was just like, wow. I mean, he can't control himself. He literally can't.
And you had tried. Anticipating the birth of the baby, he had tried alone to wean himself down and got clean for a couple of weeks, I guess.
Yeah.
Until that guy
until the friend
came
comes.
to the hospital.
I think that
and gave him some perks.
Shows, just how cunning this thing is, and I'm glad you saw it for what it is, that action is a result of the disease. I mean, even though at that point in time when my daughter was born, I hadn't used anything in a couple of weeks, couple of days, whatever the case was, just that craving, that mental block that just, I did it before I could even think about what was even happening. And, you talked about the book, Night of the Gun. I mean, for me, that experience,
have you read that?
I have, it's fantastic. But that experience, I mean, just shows, and that last year of my use, before, after my daughter was born, the hopelessness and just how horrible you feel doing those things, like he talked about leaving the kids in the car. I mean, the things that I would do around my daughter with the justification in mind that if I get high, then I can take care of her. If I'm not withdrawing, then I can be the dad that I want to be, is a horrible, horrible way to live.
Yeah. I mean, it's really like a possession you see in a movie where somebody's body is taken over by a spirit or something, and like you're not in control anymore. Congresswoman, you write in the book about, I mean, first of all, I want people to know, it's not like you were just like whistling around. Like, you were giving Harry drug tests in high school. Like, I mean, like, it's not like you had no idea and were completely oblivious. And, I mean, you were literally giving him drug tests in high school because his headmaster had said, we think he's high, and et cetera. I mean, like, you were trying. I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. But at one point you talked, I just thought this was such an interesting moment when Sean and Charlotte, your neighbors with whom you're close, basically come to you and say, we think Harry's on drugs. I think he's in high school at this point. And you say inside you're wounded by the fact that what you thought was a private family matter is now like people outside can see it. And you say, oh God, they think my kid's a drug addict. My worst fears were reflected in Sean's eyes, my lighthearted neighbor who cared deeply for us, especially for Harry. Looking back, I'm sad about that reaction. Why did the truth offend me? Did I think we were too good for it? Damn the stigma, damn my ignorance. And that's something I know that is important to you. And one of the reasons why you wrote this book and why you're talking to me now is that the stigma needs to go. Yeah. It's like, it'd be like saying that, hey, we think your son has a limp. Do you want to go get, that's what it needs to be. But you caught yourself embarrassed. Yeah.
I felt trapped in it. I was stung by that. I thought Harry had a drug problem. It's also a matter of language. To know that your son is an addict is a very harsh word. It's one thing to say, I think he has a problem. I'm pretty sure it's drugs. But when I saw that reflected from their face, and they only love Harry, it made me, number one, look at Harry, because as somebody slips into addiction, they look worse and worse by little bits and pieces every single day. Harry's affect, his color, his everything was slipping away from him. And in that moment, when Sean said that, I saw Harry the way they saw Harry. And I was mad at myself for being upset with the word, the notion that my son is a drug addict. I think it's partly language, and it's partly, yeah. I got to do whatever I can do to stop the stigma.
But and talk about that, if you would, for a sec, just about the fact that we need to have humanity in this while we discuss this, while policymakers and the public, while we address this. This isn't just about like, oh, we should, that's their problem down the street, or, people should be embarrassed. I mean, this is a very common issue going on in the United States right now. And we need to have the humanity be part of the discussion, the acknowledgement of problems. It's not just like, oh, these people are causing crime, or, oh, these people can't be trusted with kids, or whatever. It needs to be about people.
It really does. And something you often talk about is when he was in treatment, he felt such shame. And a priest came to him, Father Bill at the treatment center, said, Harry, and this unlocked something for you. You are not a bad person trying to be good. You're a sick person trying to be well. And so I just think if we could see the addict, that harsh word, if we could see the humanity in the addict, and peel away the bad behaviors, sadly, that are connected, whether it's stealing or, neglecting what you should be doing and looking awful. If we could peel that away and look into the person and see their humanity, that maybe then we would develop policies around healthcare and make sure there'd be beds for recovery, make sure that people would have coverage for recovery, long-term recovery as is needed, not a short-term stay for an overdose in an ER. If we could just tap into the human person inside the disease, what happens is the hope of recovery.
And something, what you're saying right now just made me think about something. There was a congressman before you came to Congress, named Trey Radel, Republican, and he was arrested I don't even know, he was arrested like DuPont Circle or somewhere with that, like buying cocaine or something. And the response was exactly what you would think the response would be in Washington, D.C. Immediately calls for him to resign. Immediately he resigned, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking about that now. And I'm thinking like, he should not have been called to resign. He should have gone and gotten help. That's what he should have gotten. He didn't need to be stigmatized and discarded. He had a problem. One thing that I know you guys are both very cognizant of, and then regrettably, I have to then let other people ask questions. So I'm going to do that after this. I like to monopolize. And Harry, I know you're very aware of this, but like you got opportunity after opportunity, second chance after third chance after fourth chance, because I don't know if because you were from a family of privilege, but definitely because you're white. And probably because you came from a good upper middle class home, and when you read the book, you realize like, you're going to these kind of like rough neighborhoods in North Philly or West Philly or wherever, Frankfurt, and there are a lot of people with your same problem there that don't get the chance to get out of it.
Don't get the break.
No. And the book only gives you a couple of those stories. I mean, I can't recall the exact number of times I've been pulled over or had an encounter, with the police while I was driving, under the influence, in possession, whatever the case may be. And I think that's a part of it, which really highlights it even more, is when I was using, I spent most of my time using in North Philly, or in Kensington, or other areas with a lot of crime and a lot going on. And, every time I got stopped, a cop would, if they even asked, would ask for my ID, take a look at it, and just tell me to go home. They'd say, go home. If I see you again tonight, I'm going to throw you in jail. And that was
One time you had a bag of weed and he just gave it back to you.
Yeah. Because, they looked at me and they didn't see the threat that they see in others, which is, not just, but that was the reality of my experience, that time after time I was let go for things. And like I said, there's only a glimpse of that in the number of stories that I could tell in the book, but it was constant because I stood out down there, so I was stopped often, but never with any consequence.
It made me, and writing the book helped us. We were aware of this, but when I learned more of the stories of him being stopped so often, it made me so plainly cognizant of white privilege, of socioeconomic privilege. If we had been poorer or people of color, he very, very likely would not be free of a record. So while the disease doesn't recognize privilege, society sadly changes how we deal with somebody with the disease. Do we lock them up? Do we throw away the key? Do we post bail that you can't post? Do you wind up derailed forever because of a record? We visited a prison, CFCF, where he had done some volunteering, and we knew, literally just looking at each other, it was a prison that could have been his own, but for white privilege, society treating people differently and incredibly unfairly.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you some of the questions. A reminder that there's a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. I see a lot of people putting their questions on the chat, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to put them on the Q&A because they get voted up and down, because obviously we're not going to get to everybody. So the first one that's on top here from Patrick Flynn. Oh wait, I'm sorry, that's not the top one. Let me tab up. Oof, wow, you got a lot. You got a lot of questions. Hold on. I'm an old man figuring out how to do this. Okay, Jill Barra says, you speak about the slippery slope of underage drinking, then pot, then pills, etc., and where that can and often does lead for kids like Harry. How do we reconcile this very real dynamic with the society that is rapidly moving toward legalizing marijuana and a culture that is increasingly normalizing marijuana use? How do parents help our kids navigate this mixed message? And let me also just add to that is that a lot of sophisticated people scoff when people talk about gateway drugs. Marijuana is a gateway drug. But obviously it isn't for everybody, but it is for a lot of people. I'll let whichever one of you wants to open it to answer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can tell you it was a gateway drug. It continued to, for one thing, it went from alcohol, which is kind of bought in stores, and it opened the door to an illegal market, to additional drugs. And I think that, if you talk about legalizing it, decriminalizing it, whatever it is, that society seems to be pushing that way. I think there is a lot of research that needs to be done, in terms of actually looking at it. I think there's a big difference between decriminalizing. I don't think people should be getting arrested and thrown in jail and having a record that's going to hold them back for the rest of their lives. I think at the same time, when you talk about fully legalizing it, it could potentially open up that slippery slope. But I think there's a rush to do it. And I, in my opinion, sort of personally, I think there needs to be more conversation and clarity around the difference between legalizing and decriminalizing, and what that access looks like, and how how people are using it. But as a society, we normalize, I mean, alcohol, the amount of people that die as a direct result of alcohol and alcohol addiction is staggering. And as a society and a culture, people flock to alcohol. Alcohol is the center of parties and weddings and events and happy hours. And, I think it's a cultural shift that we need to look at. To go back more to the question, I think a big part of it for families and addressing it is we need to have more open conversations about it that aren't stigmatizing, that aren't, kids are going to experiment and do things that whether their parents tell them to or not, but we need to have an opportunity and an ability to have real conversations, because if someone does start slipping further, they need to be able to feel comfortable to ask for help or let somebody know and let them know that, it might not be their fault. They might have a substance use disorder, and it might be the marijuana that's making that noticeable. But the sooner you catch it, the sooner you talk about it, the better the outcome can potentially be.
Yeah, look, our president is our last two presidents, including the current one, doesn't touch it because of his fear that, in Biden's case, because he's concerned, and I know people in prominent Irish Catholic families that don't touch it either because they're concerned that it might be in the DNA. Addiction. Trump didn't drink either. Congresswoman, the lieutenant governor, you don't have to get involved in anything, but he's very vocal, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, about wanting to legalize marijuana in Pennsylvania, where it is not legal right now, but lots of neighboring states are. Does your family's experience inform your view of this? Do you think drugs should be legalized? Does it make you less inclined, more inclined? What do you think?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I think that I want to know more and understand more. And through Harry's journey, we've had a chance to learn more about addiction. Not everybody who smokes pot is going to wind up down this road. When we were at the bottom phase of his addiction, active use, he was abusing prescription drugs. So the legalization of marijuana is an important question. I have moved closer toward legalization. At a minimum, we have to decriminalize because too many people have suffered penalties that are not connected to crime. People arrested and put in jail for possession. It's just absolutely wrong. Society needs to learn from that. But in terms of an understanding of the addictive brain, not everybody who will use certain substances, legal or illegal, will wind up in this sad state of addiction. It is a disorder. It is, I think the estimate when I looked at it or studied it was somewhere in the area of perhaps 16% of folks. Is that still an accurate percentage?
I'm not sure.
But so I shouldn't say that because I don't have the medical certainty on that. But not everybody who uses or tries pot or something else is going to become addicted. And remember that an awful lot of folks with opioid addiction, they are addicted to prescription medications, and the prescription medications is robbing them of their life.
And one of the things Harry writes about in the book, I think you were at the College of Charleston, is that right? Is that where you went freshman year?
Yeah.
Freshman first semester. Is that there were kids that you were hanging out with that were able to get high and be productive members of society. You were not.
Yep. Correct.
But there were people who were able to do that. So here's another question. Patrick Flynn asks, Harry, what would you say to help those in recovery who are afraid to be open and honest with their journey? And likewise, Congresswoman Dean, what would you say to the family member who doesn't want to speak about their journey due to stigma? You guys can figure out who goes first.
Patrick, I'm glad you're on, and thanks for the question.
You know Patrick?
Yeah.
We know Patrick.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
He's a very good
Wonderful
friend.
guy. But no, I think, one thing I'll tell you right now from my experience of just even the last few days of starting this process of releasing this book, the outpouring of love and support has been overwhelming. The number of people who have reached out to me that I don't know, some that I do, that have contacted me over the last couple of days with either a connection to recovery or a connection to losing someone because of a substance use disorder has been so rewarding, just to see the amount of people that are out there that get it, and I think that especially now with so much of our world being virtual and the connection piece can feel limited. I have found that it has been so valuable, so rewarding, and like a weight lifted off of me. I don't want to go too long, but the one other thing I want to add is when we started writing this book, I was working in a different career, different field. And in that job, I had, a few years in recovery, but in that job, I didn't talk about it, to customers, to people that I interacted with. It was unspoken, and I felt uncomfortable sharing that because I thought it would be stigmatized. Through writing the book, I had the opportunity to get into the field of, substance use treatment, and I worked for Karen where I went, and the freedom that I have felt to be wholly me, to be fully myself, to not have to hide that portion of my life has been something that's just been a weight lifted off of me. And I think given me an opportunity to thrive in my recovery and, in my personal life. So I'd encourage anybody, maybe don't rush into it. But when you're ready, when you do tell your story, the amount of people that will reach out and appreciate it is tremendous.
And Patrick, I was thinking of your question. I think it took me some time to evolve and recognize that the more I could reveal what was going on literally under our roof. If you could take a look at what I consider a relatively ordinary suburban Philadelphia family, recognize that we were struggling with this thing and say that out loud to somebody else. Number one, what we hear immediately is, oh, I've got a friend, I've got a brother, I've got a sister. Immediately you make a connection and the curtain sort of drops on the shame and the stigma. So I wouldn't preach to anybody. People have to come at it in their own time and in their own way. But the more we can just say that this is a disease and that people need to be cared for, given hope, given the chance at recovery, the medical innovations and things that we're learning, that scientists and doctors are learning every day, every week is important, and we have to keep that going. But the more we hide what the truth of this is, I think that the more we slow that down.
Here's one from Kathleen Werner. She writes, as a retired substance abuse counselor, I often wore starfish jewelry on a very difficult day when I would sit and cry and question if I was able to help anyone. I would remember the starfish story of the little boy who kept picking up starfish on the shore and then threw them back. The story goes that there are all these starfish, and there's a little boy who throws one in, and somebody comes over and says, "What are you doing? There's so many starfish. You're never going to throw all of them back in the ocean. What you're doing doesn't matter." And he takes a starfish and throws it in the water and says, "It mattered to that one." That's the story. A little shorthand here. Does your starfish hold special meaning to you? Is that why you're wearing a starfish? Is that what that's for?
Person's name, that is exactly why I wear the starfish. Because sometimes when the world seems like the problems are so huge, whether it's in a family or with health or in politics, and you think, I can't make a difference, I think of the little boy on the beach throwing a starfish in. And the older, wiser man says, "Little boy, what are you doing? You can't make a difference." And just like you said, he picks one up and said, "I made a difference for that one." I literally say to my team, "We're saving starfish today. That's all we can do. We just are saving starfish." So whoever asked that question, I live by that rule. Whenever I get discouraged, we're saving starfish.
That was a very astute observation. I'm supposed to go up to the top to see the ones that have been voted the best questions.
Get voted.
Well, while you're looking, I just want to add quickly on that. I mean, I know when I was in treatment, counselors and all of the support staff that were there, my mom mentioned the story with a guy, Father Bill, one phrase that he said to me, he would have never known the way that impacted my life. And nobody would have known until quite some time later. So I just commend anybody who is working in this field and working on this issue in any way, because you don't know how something you say or something you do that may seem so small could completely and dramatically just change somebody's life.
Yeah, it's a very poignant section of the book. And Congresswoman, I think you already mentioned it. It's just, you're not bad trying to become good. You're sick trying to become healthy. It's such a immediately just reshuffled the way you looked at everything, which is so amazing. Harry and Mad writes M. Goodall. I don't know if that I'm pronouncing it. I don't know. Somebody's done a shorthand.
You know who that is?
Yeah.
Mark. Okay.
Mark.
Harry and Mad, can you talk about how a parent or loved one can seek help? I think the first step can seem so daunting and terrifying to all involved. Please share your first steps and your experience asking for help and finding resources. That's a great question.
Absolutely. I think we have two different sort of sides on this. I mean, I get to work, in the field and help people every day. And something that I would say is when I was caught up in active addiction, I had no idea the resources that are out there, the number of people and organizations that are there to support people and get them into recovery. I had this idea of what I thought, rehab would be, but on the flip side, working for a treatment center that I trust, that I believe in, I've seen just how many people are out there. So I would say start by reaching out and find somebody that you trust, because there's a lot of options. It can be difficult to navigate. But when you start to get into it and find people in recovery and find other families who have been through this, you'll be amazed at how the doors open, and what is truly out there. So I think it starts with a conversation. It starts with opening up. Part of that is, we got to kind of break down that stigma. We talked about it. It's not just for the individual, but for the whole family. But I love being able to work in this field and help people every day, try to find treatment and find the right treatment for them.
And I would say, I'm just going to put down as a baseline to this conversation that we don't have enough resources. There are some areas that there are deserts of no resources. And if you're uninsured or you're on Medicaid, you have fewer things available to you. So that's just the predicate. And we have to do something about that. What I did in my stumbling about it was, so I don't know the perfect path, but I remember having coffee with a friend, a neighbor who I knew her son had gone into treatment. I didn't know what was going on with Harry. I knew something was terribly wrong. And I had a long conversation with her, and she opened my eyes that what I suspected was probably so. I remember saying to her, he's hanging around with these terrible looking people and they just seem to not care about anybody else. And she brought me up short and she said, you think that about those young kids?
Yeah.
What do you think their parents are saying about Harry? Why would he be with them? And it's just, again, it brings you up short. But having honest conversations with maybe somebody who might have been through something like it is a place to begin. And then once we discovered what was the truth, I started fanning out, doing my research, finding where we could go for treatment, calling on friends and saying, help me do this research until we could identify a place for Harry to go.
We only have time for a couple more questions. Here's one that's really good. It touches on some of the racial issues that we were talking about earlier. It's from Lindsay Jason. Do you think that pushes for supporting mental health and recovery are steered towards the more privileged and wealthy rather than towards people of color who are less privileged and struggling with addiction? Personally, I feel that people see addicts of color as lost hopes, but view white or wealthier addicts as victims. What do you think? And do you have ideas of strides to be taken to shift that particular bias to support minority groups? What do you think, Congresswoman?
Well, I think that person raises really important points. Society has somehow created lenses that we look at people differently. It's a horrible, sad statement of lost hope versus a victim. I will say that if you visit Kensington or you drive around Philadelphia, white folks who are clearly addicted also sometimes have that affect of lost hope. So as a society, I think we owe it to people, regardless of their skin color, regardless of whether they're rich or poor, to look at them the same as a human being who is struggling with an affliction, a disease, and try to get them. But your reader there, or your writer there, is absolutely right. We stigmatize in an even stronger way people of color who struggle with addiction. We saw that failure through the so-called war on drugs, and how we just criminalize the heck out of people of color. I'll let you talk to it, but yes, it's infuriating to me. That is something that society has to grapple with.
Harry talked about it earlier. Harry, I want to ask you one question that just occurs to me, which is, you have a daughter. You write about your daughter in the book. You have a daughter. She is 9. Is that how old?
Yeah. Yep.
What are you going to say to her about drugs and alcohol when she's 14, 15? What are you going to tell her? I don't know what she knows about this, but at some point she's going to
Yes.
realize it.
We've started, some conversations around the book, and really our children's book, You Were Always Loved, was something that, we wanted to do, but for me was something I was so passionate about. Because even in this process, I realized I hadn't had a lot of conversations with her, and she's young. So I'm not going to, give her too much and overload her with information that she's not ready for. But I think it's kind of letting kids know, and this goes back to the marijuana and alcohol and, teens. I heard this from somebody else, so I can't fully take credit for it, but kind of having the conversation of, I know kids are going to try things. And what we talked about, you don't know what the outcome is going to be, because some people are able to function. But for me, I was not.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be able to. And she may have that same trajectory that I did. So I think it's really about having very honest and open conversations when she's ready for it. But to talk about it as kids are going to be doing this. And it may seem okay, it may seem natural, but showing them where it might lead in a more realistic way that is more relatable than what I experienced when I, went through the DARE program. I saw these horrible images and figured, oh, that'll never be me.
Right.
To have the conversation with highlighting maybe somebody that we know. And for her, it's her dad, that the outcome is not always as positive, and it can be a lot worse than the outcome that I've had.
I want to read this one just because it's such a poignant story from a woman named Michelle Macris. Harry was relapsed part of your recovery. My son relapsed and sadly suffered an accidental overdose due to fentanyl poisoning. I'm so sorry, Michelle.
I'm so sorry to hear that. For me, it was not. I know many people where that is part of their story. And I think that's where we need to not lose hope. Again, going back to this being a disease that is treatable. If someone has cancer and there's a recurrence of cancer, you don't stop there. You keep trying, you keep going for treatment, and you keep pushing. But for me, I was incredibly fortunate to receive really just incredible care, incredible treatment, and long-term treatment. Because I think it's really important for people to understand that, you don't just go to, treatment or a detox for 7 days or 28 days and it's over. This is a lifelong process of recovery. A good treatment can give you an excellent and incredible foundation towards recovery, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And if relapse is part of that, then you can just keep trying, keep plugging away, and don't give up hope.
So
because
sorry.
there's, there are,
Yeah.
you never know what the outcome is going to be. But again, I'm so sorry to hear about your son.
And I'm just going to squeeze this one last one in for you, Congresswoman, which is Kim Porter says, I have found that being transparent about our family story has led to hundreds of opportunities to be of service to other families. Are you prepared for the outpouring of need from those in crisis on a national scale? And she says, P.S. I adore you both.
Hello, Kim. Kim is a dear friend who has been side by side with us on this journey. So hello, Kim. And I actually am thinking about that very thing. As soon as, I think it was right after our program with you, Jake, we got an immediate email from a mother in need. And I said to my team, I hope you've all been thinking about this, but we are going to touch people. They're going to reach us, and I can't let them fall through the cracks. So we've literally in my office prepared, and this is not to conflict and try to sell a book. This is about how do we help others. We've prepared as many resources as we can collect that are specific to the Southeastern Pennsylvania region, some national resources. But I am worried, Kim, and I'm going to call upon you. I am worried. How do I make sure that nobody falls through the cracks if they reach out to Harry or to me for some help? We'll do the very, very best we can to try to connect them to hope. I hope literally, we hope we give people hope that there are brighter days ahead. We are sorry for those who have lost so much. But Kim, I'm going to call upon you because you're an expert, and thanks for the love.
So we've reached our time. I just want to remind people, the book is called Under Our Roof, A Son's Battle for Recovery, A Mother's Battle for Her Son by Madeleine Dean and Harry Cunnane. And it's been a real honor. And I want to thank you for trusting me to conduct this and also to do it on the show on CNN earlier. You are, I don't know how many starfish you're saving, but I know you're saving starfish. And you're both very brave, and I'm very